I didn't confront him and say, "I think you're a narcissist." I knew better than that. Instead, I did something much quieter. I started saying no. I started expressing my own opinions. I stopped automatically apologizing for things that weren't my fault. And I started watching what happened when I didn't immediately agree with him. Because the more I studied narcissistic abuse, the more I began to realize I didn't need to convince him of anything. I just needed to pay attention. And what I saw over the next year was impossible to ignore. One of the biggest things I learned was that control doesn't always look like someone telling you exactly what to do. Sometimes, it looks like making you afraid to make the wrong choice. It looks like questioning your own judgment until you stop trusting yourself. It looks like constantly explaining yourself until you're too exhausted to disagree. And sometimes, it looks like calling your opinion disrespect. At the time, I thought I was learning how to become a better wife. Looking back, I was learning how to make myself smaller so someone else wouldn't become angry. And once I began to understand that, I started paying attention to something I had ignored for years. What happened when I simply voiced that I had a different thought or a different opinion? For years, if something went wrong, it somehow became my fault. So I started making a small change. I just stopped touching his things. If he left something on the kitchen counter, I left it there. If he left something in the bedroom, I left it there. I wasn't trying to be petty. I was trying to protect myself. Because if something went missing or something was moved, I already knew what was going to happen. He would ask me, "Where is it?" And if I said I didn't know, he might respond, "You had to move it. Where could you have put it?" As if it was impossible for him to ever misplace anything, which was usually the case. And after blaming me, he never apologized for the false accusations. So I started leaving everything exactly where he put it. That way, if he asked me where something was, I could honestly say, "I don't know. I didn't touch it." And be removed from the stress of him trying to make me find something that sometimes I had no idea where to even look. One day, he misplaced his wedding ring, and he immediately said,
"The first thing I thought was that you probably came in here messing with stuff."
I looked at him and said, "I don't touch your things. I don't know where it is." And that moment really stuck with me, because I realized I had changed my behavior. I was tired of being blamed when things go wrong. I also started noticing how often my judgment was questioned. One day, we were getting ready to go to a potluck dinner at a friend's house. I was getting the children dressed and ready, and I hadn't had time to prepare my dessert. But it was something simple. I knew I could make it when we arrived. He rushed me out of the house, wouldn't let me bring my dish. He told me, "You don't have good judgment." Because, according to him, there wouldn't be enough time, and I would look stupid making food when everything else was already done and ready to eat. But when we got there, the host was still grilling. There was plenty of time for me to make the dessert. So later at home, I casually said, I figured I would have time to make the dessert after we got there. The rest of the food wasn't ready yet. And instead of simply saying, "Yeah, I guess you were right," he told me that my job wasn't to call him out. Because apparently, pointing out that I had time to do something was the same as teaching him. And according to his interpretation of scripture, a woman wasn't supposed to teach a man. I said, "I'm not teaching you anything. I'm saying I wish I would have brought my ingredients because I actually had time to make the dessert." And he said,
"Would you talk to your boss like that?"
I said, "Yes." Then he asked, "Would you talk to God like that?" And I said, "I wouldn't have to. God is perfect in all his ways, and you're not God." And that's when he said,
"I'm not saying I'm God. It's about authority."
I didn't argue. I took note. Because this was a conversation we had over and over again. He would say he wasn't comparing himself to God. Right after he actually did compare himself to God. But then he'd say it's an analogy about authority, it's the principle. And he had to explain it to me for hours. Until I could get it. But then the principle. always seemed to end with the same conclusion. He was the authority, and I was supposed to submit. This time, I realized after all these same conversations that deep down, he really did believe he should be treated like God. On a family road trip, we stopped to get something to eat, and he ordered for everyone. Once the food came to the table, I asked the kids, "Who wants salad?" And he immediately said,
No, don't give them options. I'm not giving anyone options.
I said, "What if they don't want it? It would just be wasted." And he looked at me and said,
Be quiet.
He looked at me and said, "Be quiet." Now the truth is coming out. I never guessed he would speak to me that way. The kids were shocked too. Again, I took note. After a moment of awkward energy while he's putting food on their plates, he turned and asked the children what they wanted on their plates. So I sat there thinking, wait, what just happened? I had asked the exact same question. But when I asked it, I was told to be quiet. When he asked it, it was perfectly fine. Why? Because he realized that I was right and it would indeed be wasted if they didn't want it. Instead of apologizing, he just moved on like nothing happened, per usual. On another trip, we stopped for gas and snacks. Headed back to the car from getting the snacks, one of the kids asked, should I get in on the other side of the car? Since we were about to get gas, they didn't want to be in the way. I said, no, it's fine, you can get in on this side. You'll already be in the car by the time your dad gets to the gas pump. I could barely finish the sentence when he came up behind me yelling,
No, no. Go to the other side.
Then he looked at me and said, that was dumb. I asked, what was dumb about it? He said, you do a lot of things that are dumb. At this point, I was done getting sidetracked with these types of statements, so I remained focused and asked again, wanting him to validate what he was saying. Okay, but what was dumb about what I just said right now? By this point, we were standing next to the car. He stopped entering his card information at the pump and stood directly in front of my face and said,
You don't stand 10 toes down with me. If I say it's dumb, you need to submit and say, okay, what do you want me to do?
So, if I thought something didn't make sense, what exactly was I supposed to do? Pretend I agreed? And that's when I realized his version of submission didn't mean mutual respect. It meant he commands. And I just shut up and agree. I kept taking note. Every time he blamed someone else for his mistake. Every time he said one thing and did another. Every time he tried to make something obvious sound like something completely different. And the more I watched, the more I started to realize this wasn't only happening to me. I started noticing the same confusion, the same fear of making a mistake, and the same need to keep the peace in my children. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it.